Hello again everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I have a special treat. Another video about Ansible, which is one of my favorite technologies. I love it so much that I've recently done an entire series about it that you should definitely check out if you haven't already done so. Now, you don't have to go through that Ansible series to understand this video. This one is standalone. If you have gone through that series, well, then I guess that'll be even more helpful because you'll get a deeper look at Ansible in that series. But this video, again, is standalone. We're going to be talking about ansible-pull, and I've been looking forward to showing you guys ansible-pull for a really long time. I actually like it quite a bit, so that's what we're going to go over in this video. Before we get started, I want to send a special thank you to all of my patrons out there who have already seen this video because my tutorial videos are released on Patreon first before the general public, so I definitely appreciate each and every single one of you. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So, what is ansible-pull? And why would you want to consider using this? Now, first of all, ansible-pull comes with Ansible. So if you have installed Ansible on a machine, then you already have the ansible-pull binary. There's nothing new that you have to install. And what it does is it allows servers, or even workstations, essentially Linux machines, to pull Ansible playbooks from a Git server and then run them locally. Even though it's downloading from a Git server, there's typically no need to maintain an Ansible server, and there's generally no single point of failure. Now, it is true that if you run your own Git server, that does become a single point of failure, but generally speaking, you'll probably use something like GitHub or GitLab, and that's maintained by, another party. There's a very little chance that those services are going to go down anytime soon. Now, best of all, it leverages the functionality of Git to extend Ansible. Now, you don't have to know Git very well to use ansible-pull. Basically, what I'm about to teach you in this video is everything you need to know. But if you learn the more advanced features of Git, such as branching, for example, you can easily make that a part of your Ansible configuration as well. But let's go ahead and see what that looks like from a diagram perspective that I think will really help you understand the value of ansible-pull. So here we have a standard Ansible layout. We have an Ansible server, and the Ansible server could be a workstation. It's essentially a central point where Ansible jobs are being run from. In this case, Ansible server is using SSH to connect to each of the machines that it manages. And as you see here, it's managing your laptop, hypothetically, as well as 2 servers. And that's all well and good, but what if you actually have some instances that are not available? Now here, let's just say, for example, you put your laptop in your bag because you're done for the day, so you close the lid, which makes the laptop suspend. It's no longer on the network, it's in your bag. And also we have a server here that is not accessible. Now, if you are thinking like an administrator, you're probably thinking, well, we need to find out why that server is down. But in this hypothetical example, let's assume that we want that server to be down. Maybe that's a server that is only accessible during certain hours. That helps with security. And it also helps with cost savings as well, because why run something 24/7 if it's not being accessed 24/7? So let's just assume that server does go down at the end of the day when everyone at the company is done working. The server in the middle is going to stay on all the time. Now in this example, Ansible is going to reach server 1 and configure it. Everything is fine. But when it goes to reach the laptop, well, it's not going to be able to do that because that's in your bag. It's going to send you an error. And then it's going to go ahead and try to connect to server number 2. It's not able to do that because it's the end of the day and that server is no longer on the network. It's going to send you an error about that as well. Now there's multiple ways to work around this problem, but what ansible-pull allows us to do is think of things in a more dynamic perspective. Now here we have ansible-pull. You'll notice that the diagram hasn't changed all that much. Now, the Ansible server at the top was replaced by a Git server. That could be a Git server that you've created yourself. It could be GitHub, GitLab, or whatever you use for your version control. Now what you will notice is that the laptop, as well as the two servers, are working in the reverse direction. They are checking in to the Git server. They are running ansible-pull locally. So what's going to happen is the laptop will check into the Git server. It'll download the Git repository that has the Ansible playbooks inside it, and it will run it against itself. The Git server is not connecting to the laptop. The laptop is just pulling the code to itself to run, hence pull. Server 1 and server 2, well, they're doing the exact same thing. So what this means is that if you put your laptop in your bag, you're done using it for the day, you're not going to get any errors because the laptop itself is running the Ansible job. And as soon as you open the lid and continue working, then the laptop will continue to check into the Git server while it is online. The same with server number 2. And that is, one of the values of this scenario. I mean, you could even have something like an RV where you're going down the road and you don't even know if you're going to have internet access half the time. And then your machines can simply check in anytime they are scheduled to run. And if it doesn't work out, well, then that machine will check in again later on and try again and run Ansible against itself. It allows your environment to be more dynamic. And then, as an administrator, when you implement a new change to the Ansible repository, then when the machines check in the next time, they will download that change and then run the change. So it basically allows you to have all of your machines basically run Ansible jobs anytime you make a commit to the repository. And that is really awesome. I love ansible-pull. It's actually my favorite method of running Ansible. So now let's go ahead and set up ansible-pull. In the next section of this video, I'm going to show you how to create a Git repository. And then after that, we'll get it installed and I'll show you a few examples. For ansible-pull to function, it needs a Git repository. In this example, I'm going to show you how to create a repository on GitHub. Now, if you use something else like GitLab, that's totally fine. But in this example, GitHub is what I'm using, so that's what you will see in this video. So first of all, I will create a new repository, and I'm going to call mine Ansible-pull tutorial simple enough. I'm going to add a README file. You don't have to, but just so we have something in the repository, I guess. Notice I have it set to public, and that's what I'm going to leave it as. Now, you can use ansible-pull with a private repository, but it's beyond the scope of this video. Just know that it is possible to do that. So I'm going to leave it as public, and then I'll click Create Repository. All right, so now we have the repository right here. It doesn't really have anything in it quite yet, but it does exist, so at least that's something. Now, what I recommend you do is add an SSH key to your account to make this process a lot easier. Now, I've already done that on my end. I already have a key here, but in case you don't, I'll show you what you need to do. So what you can do is click on your icon on the upper right-hand corner, go to Settings. You can go down here to SSH and GPG keys. In my case, I already have a key right here. But if you don't already have that, you can click New SSH key and give it a title here. So I'll call it J Ansible Test. That's good enough. And then you can paste your SSH key right here. If you don't already have an SSH key, then in a terminal, you can run this command right here, SSH keygen. So I'll just press Enter. And then to keep everything simple, I'm just going to accept the defaults for each. Teaching you guys all about SSH keys is beyond the scope of this video, but we only need a key, so I'll just keep pressing Enter. We should have a key. So if I go into my home directory, .ssh, we should have at least these two files at this point, id_rsa, and the same, but with the .pub extension. Now this file right here is the private key. We don't want to expose that at all. But this public key right here, that's the one we actually want to give GitHub because that one is, well, it's a public key. It doesn't matter if other people see it. So we just take a look at the output here. So I'll just go ahead and cat it out. And we have this long string of text right here. It's an RSA key. This is the key, and then this is the title. This is actually my username, and my machine name is unicorn, hence the unicorn in my bash prompt. So what we're going to do is copy all of this to our clipboard, and then here on GitHub we can paste it in, just like that. So I'll click Add SSH key, and now we have that key right here. So now what we can do is pull this repository on the machine that we are going to be working from. So I'll just go back to the beginning. I'll go into our new repository right here. I'll click this green button, make sure it says clone with SSH, and then I'll click the clipboard icon to copy to the clipboard here. But first of all, we do need to have Git installed on our local machine. So if you get user bin git when you execute which git, then you already have it. If you don't, then you're going to need to install it. If you are on Debian or Ubuntu, it's something like sudo apt install git, just like that. That'll go ahead and get that installed. But if you are on a different distribution, you would change apt to DNF, yum, or something like that. So anyway, so now that we've added our SSH key, we should be good to go ahead and pull down the repository. Now I'm currently in the SSH directory, so I don't want to pull down the Git repository here. So I'll just go back to the home directory, and then I will do git and then clone, and then I'll go ahead and paste in the URL. And there you go. Press enter. And there we go. We should have the repository locally, so I should be able to change directory to be inside that. So we have the README file right there. So I am going to go ahead and edit that. I'll use Nano. I prefer Vim, but Nano is easier to explain in a video. Let's edit that just to show you guys how to make a change, basically. So I'll go down a line here, and I'll just put a simple description. Or whatever you want to do. And I'll just do Control O and then Enter to save it, Control X to exit out. Then we can do Git status. We see that we have a pending change right here. So to add that change to the commit, we could do git add and then the name of the file. And then git commit with -m and then a message. Easy enough. And then we can go ahead and send that commit up to GitHub with git push origin master. So now if we go back to the browser and check on the repository, I'll refresh it. We can see that the new text that I've added right here is present in the file. So we have successfully added our first commit to our repository, and now we are all set to get started on ansible-pull. We'll get back to the video shortly, but first I want to mention my sponsor, Linode. Founded in 2003, Linode is the largest independent cloud service provider built on open source. And Linode is giving Learn Linux TV subscribers $100 in credit when you sign up today. If it runs on Linux, it runs on Linode. Multiple distros are available, including Ubuntu, CentOS, Alpine, and of course, Arch. And multiple server configurations make any app or service flexible and scalable. Use your Linode server to host a website, set up your own personal VPN, create a Nextcloud instance, host a game server, and more. Linode also features 24/7/365 support that's available by phone or support ticket regardless of your plan size. And the pricing is simple, with monthly caps that ensure no hidden fees, and generous monthly transfer that's built in, which means no large bill surprises like you get from AWS or Azure. So go ahead and check out Linode. They are actually my infrastructure provider. I love their service. So go ahead and sign up with the link in the description below to get your $100 in Linux server credits. And now let's get back to the video. All right, so let's go ahead and get Ansible installed if you don't already have it installed. Real quick, I'll just give you an idea of my setup here so you can understand the flow of this tutorial. So what you are seeing on the screen right now is obviously a terminal, but more specifically, I am running tmux inside a terminal. Now, tmux is beyond the scope of this video. I actually have an entire series about tmux if you want to learn it. But the reason why I mention it is because I have two tabs open here. The one on the left which is highlighted at the bottom, is my local laptop. So what I'm going to do on the laptop is write the Ansible configurations and push those changes up to GitHub. Then over to the right, on the second tab, I have an Ubuntu Server. On the Ubuntu Server, I'm going to have it run the Ansible configurations. In this tutorial, I'm only going to show one server. Now obviously you can have hundreds of servers with this method, but I only need one to show you guys how this works. So here on the laptop tab, I am inside the ansible-pull directory, basically the repository directory that we pulled down. So that's where I'm at right now, and I am in the root of that directory. We only have the README file at this point. Now first of all, we need Ansible to be installed. And if you haven't already done that, it's just a matter of running sudo apt update. And if you are using a different distribution on your workstation, you can adjust that command accordingly. But when it comes to Debian or Ubuntu or anything based on those distros, the command should work out the same. So we should be able to run sudo apt install Ansible just like that. Now I already have it installed on my end. So if I run this, it's just going to tell me that it's already installed. Now when you install it, you get the ansible-pull command automatically. I didn't do apt install ansible-pull. You just install Ansible and you get ansible-pull, so that's pretty simple. So next we can actually create our first Ansible playbook. And I'm going to start you guys off with something really simple. So on my end, I will use nano and I will edit a file by the name of local.yml. And again, I am in the root directory of the repository. This file does not exist yet. You can name this something else, but I don't recommend it because ansible-pull actually expects to find a file in the root of the repository named local.yml. I'm not going to show you guys how to run a different playbook in this video. It's actually pretty easy. It's beyond the scope. So I'm going to leave the name as exactly local.yml. So I'll press enter. And of course we have an empty file because it doesn't exist yet. So what I'll do is paste in the contents right here so that you guys can see what I'm doing. So here we have the first version of our local.yml file. This is a really simple one, and I'm going to go over it to make sure that you guys understand it. Now, first of all, this is a YAML file. You do not need to know or master the YAML format for using Ansible. That's something that'll come automatically as you learn Ansible. Now, YAML actually has other use cases, and other technologies use this file format as well. So this is not specific to Ansible, although the verbiage contained inside is. Essentially, a YAML file is just a simple text file that contains a list of instructions. And the instructions in this file are specific to Ansible. The first line here is where we call out which hosts we would like to run Ansible against. Now, normally that could be something like web servers, database servers, or whatever category you have created or role you have created. That's beyond the scope of this video. But since we are running this against localhost, then we're going to include localhost here. Normally, Ansible uses SSH. But since this is using ansible-pull and we are running it locally, we don't need SSH for that. So we are setting the connection type to local so it doesn't default to SSH. Now in this line, we have become true, which is essentially saying to Ansible, we need to use sudo for this. Become is actually more advanced than that. Sudo is just the default method that it uses for privilege escalation. But if you don't actually tell it what kind of privilege escalation you would like to use, it's going to use sudo. Now down here we have a task section. And the first task, we have a name, we're giving it a name of install htop. Now here we are using the apt module. And this is for Debian and Ubuntu systems, so if you try to run this on a CentOS system, it won't work. You can use DNF or yum for that. So you might need to change that accordingly, and then we are installing a package by the name of htop. If you are using a different distribution other than Debian or Ubuntu, I will leave it up to you to change the name of the package accordingly. Now when it comes to indentation, it's very important to have everything indented properly. The first line is all the way to the left, and the two lines below it are tabbed 2 spaces to the right. They are lined up with the H. So here we have a hyphen, which is like the beginning of a section. And then down here we have tasks. We have the name lined up directly underneath that. 2 spaces over is apt, and then 2 spaces over from there is the name. So far, That's our local.yml file. And this is the file name that we are going to be working with throughout the rest of the video, but essentially that is how the file is laid out. We will be adding more to the file shortly. But there you go. That was our overview of the first version of the local.yml file. So we should be good to go ahead and run it. So let's go ahead and save the file. We'll exit out and we'll do git status. We see that we have the local.yml file here, so we need to go ahead and push that up to Git. So git add and then that file. And then I will commit it with a message. Doesn't really matter. This isn't a tutorial on Git, but you get the idea. Press enter. And now that we have the commit staged, we can go ahead and push it up to GitHub. Just like that. And there we go. So up here, I go ahead and refresh the page. We now have the local.yml right here. And what's pretty cool is that we also have color syntax highlighting in GitHub as well, because GitHub understands what kind of file this is. Now back on the terminal, let's go ahead and switch over to the server, and we can go ahead and run it. Now, first of all, we will need to have Ansible installed on every single server or workstation that we intend to configure with ansible-pull. Now, earlier in the video, I showed you how to do that on the workstation, on my laptop, so to speak, but I don't actually have Ansible on the server yet. So sudo apt update for Debian and Ubuntu systems. And then sudo apt install Ansible. Enter. That should be good to go. We now have Ansible-pull at our disposal, and now we can go ahead and run it. So the way we do that is sudo ansible-pull -U and then the URL. Now you might already have the repository URL in your clipboard, but if you do, it's probably the SSH version. What we actually need is the HTTPS version instead. So back in our repository, we can click the green button. We can copy the HTTPS URL. Then we can go ahead and paste it right here. So to explain this command a bit, we have sudo. We actually need to authenticate with sudo first, even though we have become in the playbook itself. We can simplify this later, and we will in this video. Since this command will make changes to the server, we will need to use sudo. And then we have Ansible-pull. That's the topic of our video today. No surprise there. We have the -U option, which is short for URL. And then we have the HTTPS URL of our repository. So let's go ahead and run it and see if it works. Now that kind of went by really quickly here, but we see that there has been a change. And we also see some warnings here. We can actually ignore these warnings and pretend that they don't exist. Essentially with normal Ansible, we would have an inventory file that would have a list of all the hosts that we intend to manage with Ansible. Since we are using Ansible-pull, we don't actually have an inventory file, so we can ignore that message because everything, as you know by now, is being run locally. Now, if I scroll up a bit, we can see that I ran the command right here, starting Ansible-pull. So it started the job, it pulled down the repository, and we get another warning here about the host pattern. We can ignore that. Again, these warnings are just specifying that there isn't an inventory file, which in our case is totally fine. And then we see that it's executing plays against the local host. It's gathering facts, which Ansible does. It's basically checking the server, workstation, whatever it is, to find out what kind of operating system it has, its CPU. It's basically taking an inventory of the machine itself. And then here we have the install htop task that we created in the file. And it says changed localhost, which means that it did install that package. Then down here, we have two things that are okay, basically two things that didn't need a change. One thing did have a change right here. That was the installation of htop, and then we're good to go. So continuing on, let's go ahead and expand our playbook to install more than one package. And that's how this video is going to go from here on out, is we're going to be adding additional functionality to this playbook as the video goes on. So let's go ahead and bring that back up. So it's actually very easy to install more than one package with a single play. So when I say play, I'm referring to basically a single task. So this play or task right here is just installing htop. So what I can do is I can actually just change the verbiage. So anyway, I will go ahead and move htop to its own line, and I will go ahead and tab it over 2 spaces and put a hyphen there. And we could add a few more packages here. So on a new line, let's go all the way over here. Midnight Commander, that's a fun one to install. And tmux as well. So instead of installing just one package htop, I'm installing a few more. So that's essentially all we're doing here. So I'll save the file. Then we can push our changes up to GitHub. So again, git status. We have that file modified, the local.yml, as we would expect. We'll add it. Go ahead and create a commit. Easy enough. So now that that is added, we can go ahead and push it up to GitHub. And we should be good to go. So now that we have that committed up to GitHub, we can go ahead and run it against the server. And it says changed equals 1. We see that right here, even though we have installed additional packages, that was all in one play, so it's only going to register one change for that entire play. But we have Midnight Commander now. And we also have tmux as well, so it was successful. So back here on the workstation, we can go ahead and add the next change and expand our playbook even further. So now what we can do is change the layout and improve the organization of our repository a bit here. And I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate that. So what I'm going to do is make a new directory called tasks, just like that. And what I'm going to do is move our local.yml file into that directory, but with a different name. And I'm going to call it packages.yml. Now, the problem is we don't have a local.yml file anymore because we moved it into the task directory, but we do need a local.yml file. So what I'm going to do is create a brand new one. And now it's an empty file. Well, of course, because we moved it into the directory with a different name. So what I'll do is paste the new version in the file right now. And here it is. So first of all, the first line hasn't changed, the second line hasn't changed, and neither has the third. Now previously this said tasks, that was what it was called, but we're doing pre-tasks. And as I go over in my Ansible series, a pre-task is basically something that you want done before anything else, and in this case, it's going to use the apt module to run the update cache option here, which is essentially the same as doing apt update to synchronize the repository index. That's what we're doing. Now here we have changed when false, because we don't care if this changes. That's almost always going to be the case. So we'll ignore that. Now here at the end, under tasks, we just have one line here, which is an include statement, and it's going to include the packages.yml file, which was our local.yml, and that's in the task directory. So it expects to find a tasks directory right here and a file name of packages.yml inside there, which it will find because we already took care of that. So I'll save the file and close out. Now, before we run this, we do want to make a quick change here. So I'm going to bring up the original file that we renamed into the editor here, and I'm going to press enter. And we need to make a few changes here. So what we're going to do is delete most of the lines here until we have just the task itself. And I'm going to line everything up to the left, 2 spaces to the left. because now that we are including this in the new local.yml file, we only actually need the task that we're running in this file right here. So I'll save it, and we should be good to go as long as I didn't make any errors here. Let's go ahead and push this up to GitHub. And I'm going to ignore all Git etiquette and basically just do git add and then a period. And that basically adds everything to the commit. Then I'll do git commit and a message of reorganized file layout. I think that's good enough. Let's go ahead and push that up to GitHub. And there we go. So as long as I didn't make any errors here, we should be able to go ahead and run this and see if it works. And it did work. Now nothing changed because we didn't actually make any changes. I mean, we did, but the changes that we've made were only for organization. We didn't actually add any new packages or anything like that, so there was nothing to actually change on the server because the previous run has already added all the packages that this one installs. Back here on the workstation, we can just keep it going and add some additional changes to our files here. Now what we're going to do is go into the task directory here. We only have this one right now. We're going to add a few more, and this is where it gets really fun. Now first of all, what I'm going to do is create a new file here called users. I'll press enter. So it is pretty cool that we can run one command to check in to the GitHub repository for Ansible and then run that Ansible configuration locally. But it would be much better if all of our servers checked into GitHub automatically and we didn't have to tell them to do so. So in this file right here, this users file, we can add any users that we want to add to all of our systems. But what I'm going to use this for is to have it create a user for Ansible to run Ansible jobs in the background. So what does that look like? Well, I'll show you. So what I'll do is go ahead and paste it in. And here we have two plays that are being run. So the first play here, we have a name. And this, again, as you probably already know, is how it shows up in the log when this task is run. We're going to use the user module. And then we're going to use it to create a user named Ansible. And we have the system option we are setting to yes, it defaults to no. There's a bunch of options for this, but we're only including the options that we want to change from the defaults, which are only these two. Then we're going to set up a new task. We're going to use the copy module to copy a file from a source to a destination. Now we haven't created this file yet, and we don't even have a files directory yet. We'll be creating that shortly. But essentially what we're telling Ansible to do is to take a file called sudoers_Ansible inside the files directory, and then put it in /etc/sudoers.d/Ansible on the target. We're going to set the owner of the file to root, the group to root, and the permissions to 0440. So easy enough. We'll save it. Now what we could do is do mkdir files. And then we could do nano files sudoers_Ansible. Press enter. And this file is only going to have one line, which is this one right here. Now what this sudoers file, is an easy way to add a sudoer to a machine. Now almost all Linux distributions allow you to do that by adding a user to a group, but you can also do so by adding a single file to the sudoers.d directory inside the etc directory, which is what we're doing here. And this file right here, we're basically setting up the Ansible user to be able to run sudo with no password, which is what is going to allow it to essentially run commands in the background without our assistance. So we'll save that. Now next, what we're going to do in this task folder is create yet another task book. So we'll do nano cron.yml and press enter. And here we have the actual code for this file. As always, we are setting a name. And here's a brand new module to use called cron. And if you are familiar with Linux already, you know what cron is. But for those of you that don't, cron allows you to schedule a task. And we're going to run a scheduled task as the Ansible user. We are going to give the task a name of Ansible provision. We are going to run this task every 10 minutes. And then for the job, we are setting that equal to user bin ansible-pull, which is the fully qualified path for the ansible-pull binary. Now, we already know what -u and then the repository URL is. We already know that. But what's up with this? -o, what does that do? Well, what that does is it actually sets ansible-pull to only run if there are actual changes to the repository. So it's going to run this every 10 minutes and check to see if there are changes. If there are no changes, it's going to abort. Nothing to do. No one has committed anything to the Git repository, so no need to run. But if you do actually make any changes to the Git repository, then it'll see that the repository has changed, that there has been a commit, and it will run it. So what that means is your servers will check in every 10 minutes, and if you have already committed any changes since the last time that it's run, well, it's going to go ahead and run that. So effectively, you run ansible-pull manually once, and then what it's going to do is create the Ansible user. It's going to create the sudoers file for the Ansible user, and then it's going to add the cron job for all the subsequent runs. So run it once, you're done. You never have to run it again. All of your servers, your laptops, your desktops, whatever you are configuring with Ansible, from that point forward, will go ahead and take over from there. Now, there is a way to make it send you a message if there is an error, for example. You might want to look into that. Otherwise, you have to check manually that everything is running properly. I'm not going to get into that in this video, but just so you know, that's something to look into later. And then at the end here, if I go all the way to the end, it's wrapped a little bit. It's basically sending all the output to dev null, and that avoids any email messages or anything like that. You could change this to redirect it into a log file if you'd like to see what's going on. That's perfectly acceptable. But anyway, that should do it. Let's go ahead and save the file and close out. Now, what we need to do is go back, and we need to edit the local.yml file yet again. And the reason for that is because we are including the packages task book right here. We are not including the new ones that we've set up. So let's go ahead and add the new ones. So tasks and then users. So now we have the new task books added to the main YAML file right here. So we'll save this one. Close out, and we should be good to go. So let's go ahead and push our changes to GitHub. So what I'm going to do is cheat the system a little bit. I'm going to add everything, then git commit. I think that's good enough. Let's go ahead and push our changes upstream. And now we should be good to go. Back here on the server, let's go ahead and run it. And let's see if I've made any mistakes or anything like that. Is this going to work? It's time to find out. And no errors. Changed equals 3. That's what we see at the bottom. Let's go ahead and look at that. So if I do an ls against the home directory, we have the Ansible user right there. We can also see the Ansible user added to the end. We set that as a system user, which means it has a UID of under 1000. So it got 997 for that. So if we check out the cron tab for that user, and we can see the cron job that Ansible added, which is this one right here, and it gives it a name. It sets it to run every 10 minutes, and it's basically just pulling the URL from GitHub, and then it's sending the output to dev null, but it will run. Now again, you can actually go ahead and redirect the output to a log file if you wish, but that's all we needed to do to go ahead and get this automated so that all the future runs of Ansible will be automatic. So now on all your other servers, workstations, whatever you have, you can basically run the ansible-pull command manually, then all of those machines will check in automatically from that point forward. And you can go ahead and start pushing your changes to Git, and then all of your machines should obey your every command, check into Git, download the changes, and then run them. So there you go. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. You know, I have a lot of fun with Ansible in general. It's one of my favorite technologies. I can't say that enough. I had a lot of fun doing the Ansible tutorial series that I just recently wrapped that I highly recommend you check out if you want to learn more. But even if all the Ansible you do is the ansible-pull tutorial that this video helped you out with, then, it's still a lot of fun because with what I showed you in this video, you can use that to centralize all of your configuration management to Git and have all of your servers obey. It's just a really awesome way to go ahead and do that. So what do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you so much for checking out this video. Subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I will see you in the next video.